Hey Layla, this is Samantha, of course. I thought that doing a screencast might be a little bit easier to kind of explain a few little things that I noticed in the photos. Overall, I think they look awesome, and I really appreciate how much time you're spending on it. The things that I noticed that are a little bit different than how I normally do things are really, I think that you might be just overthinking it or trying to compensate for things that I necessarily just kind of look over. A few of the things that I noticed when I first pulled them up, I feel like you're really paying awesome attention to skin tones and things like that, and so I think that they look awesome. I'm kind of just flipping through some shots real quick. That is a beautiful picture that's beautifully edited. I love it. One thing that I do notice in these photos here is that maybe the colors in the background were intensified a little bit. Maybe you worked on trying to bring the greens and the yellows out, which I think it looks really great. But I think that as you move through the images, you kind of notice a difference between some of them, where this one is I feel like the circumstances were perfect. They were all smiling. The light's really good on their faces. The light's awesome on the back of their hair. And I really don't mind the color in the background being brought up a little bit. I think it looks really great. But then I'm kind of thinking about how they look next to some of the other photos. These were some of the examples that kind of stood out to me because I kind of knew the environment I was shooting in. This one here, I think, actually looks really good. He is standing in the right spot with the light and everything. And I noticed that you brought the greens out of the bushes and things that are surrounding him, and I think it looks really pretty. But I think that because they're moving around in some of these photos and they're kind of moving in and out of the good light, this one is an example that kind of stood out to me because I feel like the greens are really bold and pretty, but their faces kind of look a little desaturated, and I'm particularly looking at his little face. I feel like there isn't a lot of contrast in his face, and I don't know what techniques you use to bring the greens out or to do this. I think their skin tones look really great, but to me this kind of, it's noticeable, and I feel like because this is kind of not contrasty and this is so contrasty, it doesn't really look like how I would normally edit it. So I think what it kind of looks like overall, I'll click on a couple other photos. I feel like there's, again, the skin colors look really awesome, but the greens are so poppy in this photo that I feel like occasionally when you're flipping through them, they're not super consistent. So I think what's happening is that you're paying attention to a lot of elements that I normally just let go and be organically the way they are. I almost always just focus on skin tones and contrast in the face and the clothing, and then I kind of let everything else just kind of follow along to how it organically looks. Especially with this being a fall session, I think that they're really not concerned if the grass looks green, because I think they know that the seasons are changing and it may be a little more muted in color. On the opposite end of it, this particular photo, I think these photos here. So the background of the photo here is nice and fall colors, and you've got the greens popping out here. But I feel like whatever settings that you use to pull and push color in and out of the photo, I feel like it's affecting particularly like their lips. I feel like they look very desaturated in terms of whether, I think her lips were maybe slightly pink. I don't think she had lipstick on per se, but I feel like, I don't know exactly what settings were used to get this. I think that her skin looks really great, and his looks okay. On my screen, it looks a little purpley, and I feel like the fact that because there's no color in their lips at all, that it looks kind of, it just looks different than what I would normally do. I feel like their skin tones aren't as vibrant. Not that I want them to be overly saturated or anything, but I feel like they may feel like they look a little, I don't know, sickly is not the right word, but I think the fact that they don't have color in their lips, they would notice that. I definitely noticed it because it was a little bit different than what I normally do. Again, I don't think that you're doing a bad job at all. I'm just kind of comparing it to how I normally shoot and edit a session. These are also some good examples of the color being a little more poppy than what I would normally do. I love that the pumpkins are super orange, but I think that they may be a little too intense. I think that what I was kind of going for was incorporating this color into it, but having it just organically be where it is instead of trying to intensify it. And I also feel like maybe because these were brought up, that his his skin tones may be a little off just because of that. I'll kind of work through a couple photos just to show you some ways that I did some things. I kind of pulled up some of the photos, and I know that not all of them are in perfect light, so I know that that is being taken into consideration and trying to compensate for things that I may have not been in control of over that moment. But I think this was one of the photos that you had picked and edited and put in the gallery. And really, it's pretty desaturated. They're in not the best light, but I think I was going for the fall colors here and how it matched with what they were wearing. And really, for most of my photos, I bump the exposure up. I bring the contrast down a bit. I can see that these highlights here on his head are a little bit blown out, and so a lot of times I'll kind of recover those with this tool right here, and then bring the contrast in with this black, bringing the blacks in. And really, their skin tones look good. He's a little bit, you know, when you have multiple people in a picture, their skin tones are never going to match. So I just try to even them both out so they look good. She's a little bit more tan than he is. He's a little bit more pink, but I think that they just know that about themselves. Her lips are still pink. His are still pink. It's still got some kind of natural, fleshy colors to it. And really, that's all I do. I think that, like I said, I think you're doing a beautiful job, and I think the photos look really good. But I think for what they're expecting from me, that you might be overthinking some of the things that that I don't think about or present to someone. So I think that they may think that's a little disconnected from what I normally show them. So just to quickly show you, this is the original version of it, and then with the slight edits, it's a little more contrasty with these tools that I've used here, and the skin colors look pretty good. They weren't really funky to begin with. And then let me show you another photo. There were a couple I think that I had picked that were kind of the example. Oh, this was a good one. So this one here was one of the ones where I could tell that the greens were intensified. Let me see if I can find it here. And again, I think what you did looks really beautiful, but I don't think that it kind of matches the style that they're expecting from me. And so this was kind of all in the same setting, and I feel like the greens are so intensified that their skin color is kind of coming off to be a little bit orange. It's not too bad. It actually looks fine, but I'm just kind of thinking through the whole set of images and how they'll kind of flow together. And so let me find this one. I think was close to the one that I have pulled out. I feel like the greens are so intense, and it's kind of affecting how the contrast in their faces are. And I know it's not the best. He's got a lot of light shining on his face here, and he's kind of in the dark here. And so I think that whatever you did evened it out really nicely, but I just don't think that it's really in tune with how I would give a final photo to them. So let me kind of show you what I would do here. Make sure that, because really, again, I just bump things up, pull things down a little bit, bring these highlights in a little bit, and then use the blacks to add some contrast. And I can see how his face is really in good light right here. He's a little bit dark. Occasionally I'll kind of use these tools here to kind of bring that up, but really I think what I'll do is just kind of bring him up so he's a little bit more in tune with his brother here, and pull these highlights back just a little bit, and then use that black to kind of intensify it. And that's it. So the greens are a little more muted than what was in the photo that you had presented, which I don't think that it's bad at all. I don't want you to think that at all. I just think it's different than what they would be expecting from me. I think that these colors here kind of just feel organically how they are, and these feel a little bit more intensified and not, you know, they were there, so they know that they weren't as vibrant. So that's kind of a comparison against, you know, what you've got in the folder here, and then how I would work through a session. And honestly, I feel like I may not do as much as what you're doing, and I appreciate the thought and the work that's going into it, but I think that you could work through it really quickly if you maybe just kind of thought about it in a different way, in terms of not worrying so much about these outlier type areas. I'm really just focused on the faces and things like that. And if the colors are funky in the background, if they're like funky, that's one thing. But if they're just maybe not as bright or as vibrant, that's okay. Like, they can just organically be how they are. I think these pumpkin pictures are another good example, because this one feels very, to me, it feels very intense compared to what I normally give to someone as a final product. And let me see if I can move some stuff around so we can compare. I'll leave that one up and then try to do this. So I know it's not the same picture, but same setting. Again, I would I love how his face is bright and looks really nice here. I'd bring that contrast down a little bit and then bring the blacks down just to bring some contrast in. And I'll kind of show you like his face in this picture. I feel like they're very similar, but I feel like on this one in particular, I don't know if it's because the oranges were kind of adjusted or how that kind of affected it. I feel like there's a lot of color naturally in the photo, and so I don't feel like there's too much that needs to go on with it. And I feel like the white balance is actually pretty good for how much color there is affecting it. It's really just a slight difference between what you had and then what I have going on here. But I feel like his skin tones are a little bit more contrasty than what I would do with just my organic, natural, slight adjustments that I'm making here. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that might help save some time for you, because really I'm just looking for exposure, kind of bumping that contrast down a little bit and bringing the contrast back, with the blacks being kind of intensified a little bit. But other than that, I kind of just leave the rest of the color alone. I feel like, I don't know if it's noticeable to you, like these pumpkins are kind of a little more muted, and these back here look a little more intensified. Same with the one in the front, kind of. I think they're just bright colors to begin with, but I just noticed that slightly as being different than how I would present, and so trying to get you in tune with how I think about things. One thing I did notice that I really appreciated that you did was with these photos here. I know the lighting was very weird, and they're in front of that water. The water was actually kind of green. Let me see if I can find, I think those are, yeah, here we go. Let me hide some of this stuff so it's easier to see. I know it's not the same shot. I actually, with this one here, knowing that the water was kind of dingy and not very pretty, I appreciated the fact that you took that into consideration in this photo. I also think that there's another photo, like there's another session that you're editing, Jill and Bill's engagement session. I feel like that's going to be something that happens in their session, because there is a lot of water around, and I know that I was trying to use my flash and get some different exposures, and so that one's kind of more of a train wreck in terms of those types of things. And this session was, I shot this all with natural light. But I do feel like there were a couple things that kind of happened in this particular photo here that may be a little bit different. I feel like it's a little more contrasty in his face than I would have liked. But again, this light was I did not actually come up with the idea of putting them there. They wanted to be photographed on this bridge, which was totally fine, and I love to accommodate what they're asking. But I knew the lighting situation was going to be a little bit funky, and so I appreciate the time that you took to try to intensify those colors. I'll kind of show you really quickly what I would do. Again, I just kind of start here, and I knew that when I brought this up that it was going to really wash out the water in the background. You can't even really tell that it's water. It looks like trees, honestly. And then bringing these down. And so I'm looking, you know, we've got some highlights here, maybe bringing this down just a little bit. The light on their faces, it's pretty muted. It isn't crazy contrasty here. And, you know, each setting, I guess, I kind of try to play a little bit. I'm not super happy with the white balance. I don't know, that might be too much. I want them to look alive. I don't want their skin tones to look like they're not feeling well, or that the colors from whatever environment they're in is reflecting off of their faces and things like that. But that's good. Like, I feel like those slight changes is good. Again, I knew that when I shot this that this wasn't going to be the most beautiful backdrop. And again, I appreciate how you intensified that. You may not have even known that that was water. I don't know if you do or not. It looks really pretty in that picture. But then again, this is kind of more in tune with what they're expecting, I think. I'm not sure if you were maybe messing with some of these settings down here and doing some saturation and kind of changing the tones. I'm totally fine in certain situations kind of playing with those types of things. It kind of, you know, it's hard when you're not sitting right next to someone to kind of walk through all of this stuff with them. But I think that for this particular photo, I appreciate that you did that. And I think with just some slight changes in the contrast, that it would be really like perfectly in tune with what I do. I actually think this one looks really great. So those are just some quick little tips. I'm going to scroll through this really quick. Oh, there's another one that I noticed that was kind of different. And this may have been an exposure thing on my end. I feel like that photo in particular is very, very contrasty. I feel like his skin's really super light here, and she's got some kind of harsher, it's not discolored, it's a skin tone, but I feel like it's just very contrasty. And so compared to maybe like this photo, which was shot in the same location, that one feels a little more in tune with what I would give someone. And I feel like, I mean, really, it's perfect. And then when you put it right next to that one, I feel like they feel so different. So I don't know. I haven't went back to look at those photos in particular to see if, let me just quickly do that. Oh, hold on. To see if maybe I had bumped up the exposure by accident or something like that, and you were trying to compensate for me having funky, let me see. Or if maybe, let's see. I know that sometimes I don't always shoot the kids in the same order too, because it depends on their mood and if they're cooperating. So yeah, so there's this one that I was a little worried about. This guy right here. Leave him up and I'll bring him over. So this, I think, is one of the same photos. So this is what I would do in this instance. Because really, straight out of camera, I feel like this is pretty good. Again, I think that maybe you were concerned with the green in the background being too muted, but it's totally fine. They're expecting that. So my basic edits really bringing this up, bringing the highlights down just a little bit to kind of bring his little face back into it, bringing these blacks in. I try to be really mindful when people have dark hair or a lot of makeup on, because sometimes when you bring the blacks down too far, it loses the contrast and the texture of it. So if you bring it down too far, it's too much. But I think there's a nice happy medium kind of in here, right there. And really, the white balance looks great. Like, I don't think it's off too much. I think that's too yellowy greenish. So I'll go back to the way it is, and that's really all I would do. So I appreciate, I can't stress that enough. I appreciate how much thought you're putting into it, because I can tell that you're looking at things that maybe I just don't even think about anymore. But in this picture in particular, I feel like these really minimal edits get it right in tune with what they're expecting. And this one, I think this one in particular, it looked a little contrasty to me. But for the most part, I think that we're kind of in tune with each other and what we're looking for. I think the black and whites look really good. I think the only thing that I would do a little differently is actually, I keep saying to bump the contrast down with the color photos, but I think with the black and white ones, I actually bump it up a little bit. But that one I love. I mean, he's got these nice highlights, and the skin tones look really good. The whites have some detail still left in it. They're not overly blown out or anything like that. The dark tones, the same thing. The contrast is still there. I think it's great. I would just tweak it just a little. I'd bump that contrast up just a little bit, and whether that be using the exposure versus the blacks or just simply using the contrast bar to kind of adjust that, that really is dependent on how you're editing things. But I think it looks great, and I think you're picking really good photos too. I think that the ones that you're picking are a nice mix of like the fun family photos and then like the nice sweet moments and things like that. I think that they look great, and I think just kind of focusing on not maybe intensifying the colors in the background might help bring these. I feel like maybe this has a lot of green brought back into it, and it's kind of affecting their facial skin tones and things like that. And so I think just maybe letting go a little bit of how much you're thinking about the background and the peripheral type things, and just focusing on what's going on with their faces. That's really what my general focus is. And I'm trying to see if there's anything else that kind of stands out. For the most part, I think they look great. I think, let me kind of flip through these just a little bit. Yeah, they look good. I know their skin tones are different, so it's kind of hard to balance them. And this was a particularly crazy session to start with, too. So there are lots of little kids, lots of things going on, lots of moving pieces, a lot of inconsistent light because I couldn't control necessarily where they were all the time. So I think that you're doing a really awesome job trying to keep up with what I'm doing here. So I'm going to cut the video short. I know it's probably still like 10 minutes, but I thought maybe that feedback might help you. And if not, just let me know. I'm going to send you an email with this link, okay?